The sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the narrow alley, merging with the soft patter of rain against cobblestones. Olivia's breath fogged the cold night air as she quickened her pace. She glanced over her shoulder, her heartbeat a pounding rhythm that seemed too loud, too urgent. Was someone following her? Or was it her mind playing tricks again? You know the feeling, don't you? That eerie sense of being watched, the prickling at the back of your neck, the desperate need to turn around, yet the fear of what you might see. Olivia felt it all now. The deserted streets of Asheville had never felt so suffocating. "It's just my imagination," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. But the sound of her voice did nothing to soothe her. It only seemed to amplify the silence that surrounded her. As she turned a corner, the streetlights flickered ominously, casting fleeting shadows on the rain-slicked pavement. One moment, the path ahead was lit. The next, it was swallowed by darkness. She clutched her coat tighter around her, her fingers trembling against the fabric. Then she heard it, a faint heartbeat. Not her own. The sound was distant at first, like a low drumbeat echoing through a vast cavern. But as she continued walking, it grew louder, steadier, and unnervingly close. Thump, 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 thump. She stopped in her tracks, straining her ears, her pulse racing in unison with the phantom sound. Could you keep walking if you heard something like that? Or would you run? Olivia tried to convince herself it was nothing more than the rain, the wind, or some distant machinery. But deep down, she knew better. This was something else, something alive. She took a deep breath and forced herself to move. Every step she took seemed to sync with the sound of the heartbeat. It was as if it was guiding her, pulling her deeper into the labyrinth of dark streets. Her shoes splashed through shallow puddles, the water soaking into her already chilled feet. Then she saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the street, shrouded in shadow. It was tall, motionless, and barely distinguishable from the darkness that cloaked it. For a moment, Olivia thought it was just her imagination, a trick of the light. But the figure stepped forward, and her heart dropped. She froze, unable to move or even scream. The figure's face was hidden, obscured by what looked like a hood. But there was something unnatural about its presence. The air around it seemed to warp and ripple, as though reality itself bent to its will. Have you ever felt the kind of fear that paralyzes you completely? That was Olivia's reality now. "Who are you?" she finally managed to croak, her voice barely audible over the relentless thumping in her ears. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if curious about her. The heartbeat grew louder, faster, and Olivia's chest tightened. Without thinking, she turned and ran. Her legs burned as she sprinted through the rain, her shoes slipping on the wet ground. The sound of her own footsteps was drowned out by the relentless heartbeat, now so loud it seemed to echo inside her skull. Was it coming from her, or was it following her? She darted into another alley, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing darker, deeper. She leaned against a brick wall, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. For a brief moment, all was silent. Had she lost it? But then, the heartbeat returned, louder, closer. It was as if it was right next to her. She whipped her head around, her eyes scanning the darkness. "Leave me alone," she screamed, her voice echoing down the empty alley. But there was no response, just the relentless thump-thump. Thump-thump. Do you think you could stay calm in a moment like this? Could you keep your wits about you when every fiber of your being screamed to run, to hide, to do anything but stand still? Olivia's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling to unlock it. She tried to call anyone, but the screen displayed a chilling message. No signal. Panic surged through her veins. The world seemed to close in around her, the darkness pressing against her from all sides. Suddenly, a whisper broke through the silence. It wasn't a voice she recognized, but it was soft, almost soothing. "Olivia," it said, drawing out her name as if savoring it. Her blood turned to ice. How did it know her name? She spun around, her back against the wall, her eyes darting in every direction. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Olivia, you can't run forever." Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, her voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" she pleaded. But the only response was the heartbeat, now deafeningly loud. Then she saw it. A pair of glowing eyes emerged from the shadows, piercing and unrelenting. They seemed to look straight into her soul, peeling back every layer of her being. The figure stepped into the dim light, revealing a grotesque, contorted face. Its skin was pale and stretched too tightly over its skull, and its mouth twisted into a cruel grin. Olivia's legs gave out, and she sank to the ground, trembling. The creature's grin widened as it crouched before her, its movements slow and deliberate. "You've been running for so long," it hissed, its voice a guttural growl. "But you can't escape what's inside you." Inside her? The words sent a fresh wave of terror through Olivia. She clutched her chest, the relentless heartbeat now so intense it felt like her ribcage would shatter. "What do you mean?" she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. The creature leaned closer, its breath cold against her skin. "You invited me in," it said, its tone dripping with malice. "You let the darkness take root. And now, I am you." Olivia's mind raced as memories flooded back. Nights spent consumed by fear, the growing void inside her, the whispers she had ignored. She had always felt something lurking in the corners of her mind, but she had dismissed it as paranoia. Now, faced with the embodiment of her deepest fears, she realized it had been real all along. The creature's grin faded, replaced by a look of satisfaction. "It's time to stop running," it said. "Time to embrace the darkness." And with that, it reached out, its hand passing through her chest as if it were smoke. Olivia screamed as pain shot through her body, her vision blurring. The heartbeat thundered in her ears, drowning out everything else. She felt herself slipping away, her thoughts fragmenting, her very essence unraveling. When she opened her eyes, she was alone. The rain had stopped, and the alley was silent. But something was different. The air felt heavier, the world dimmer. And when she looked into a nearby puddle, she didn't recognize the reflection staring back at her. The face was hers, but the eyes, those glowing, unrelenting eyes, were not. She touched her face, her fingers trembling. The reflection mimicked her movements, but the grin that spread across its lips was not her own. The heartbeat returned, steady and constant. It wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside her, a reminder of the darkness she could never escape. So, reader, what would you do if the monster wasn't out there, but within you? If the thing you feared most wasn't something you could run from, but something you had to face every single day? Olivia's story doesn't end here, and neither does yours. If you found yourself drawn into this tale, if you felt the fear creeping in, remember to subscribe. There's more to come. More stories, more shadows, and more questions that will keep you up at night. Because the heartbeat never stops, and the darkness is always waiting.